Hey everybody, Brendan here. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be continuing the Dragon Sicilian Speedrun, and we're already getting some interesting stuff here. Now, Bishop d3, interestingly enough, could be an interesting way to play c3, Bishop c2, and d4. So we're going to let them play that. Yeah, looks like that was actually the case. And I kind of want to play something like e5 to try to mess with them a little bit. But I don't know if that's the right call. I could play knight c6 instead. Knight c6 prevents d4. And then I play d6, or do I play e5? We're already into the thick of it. e5 here could be a little bit of a strange move, but it also could be a decent one. And the reason why I say it could be decent is because we're transposing into a completely different opening. This is something I have done a couple times, and I do like the results of it, but I think we should stay true to the dragon formula and just play d6. Okay. And yeah, with h3, I'm getting more and more tempted to play e5. Okay, I guess we're going to talk about transpositions today. So this is a way to transpose into a completely different opening. This is all of a sudden no longer a Dragon Sicilian. This is pretty much just a Ruy Lopez. And what we're going to do is treat it like we're playing the Ruy Lopez. Just because, again, you're playing one opening doesn't mean you should just stick to that and just say, hey, I'm playing this one opening and you know, I'm gonna refuse to be flexible. Sometimes if you can make a good transposition into a different opening, you absolutely should. And I don't think this is a bad way to do it. So here we're going to be playing this move. We could play bishop h6, or we could play h6 first. I don't hate rook b8. Rook b8 is kind of one of those typical moves, so is a5. I like a5 as well, going for b4. Let's go for a5. Gaining space, this is a normal way to play in the Ruy Lopez, where we are trying to play for this move b4. Okay, so they want to push. And I think we should just be okay with that. So we can take it, or we can push. But we probably should do something about this. If we take it once... Well, I feel like if we take it once, we should probably take it again. But we can also take and then play d5. And this looks like it actually just completely blows up the center. But I think that's a good thing. After we play this move d5 at the end, takes, knight takes. If they try anything crazy like bishop e4, it doesn't work out. We can always take this bishop on e3. We always have bishop b7 as well to defend the piece. I feel like this is the right call. We should just take and play d5. And by doing this, we're just completely eradicating the center and actually opening up our bishop because of this. Because you can't maintain this pressure. So they want to take like that. Should I take with the knight? I don't see anything wrong with that. I'll take with the knight. So I'm threatening to take on c2 or on f3. I would probably take on c2 just because the bishop is worth more here. Knight c3 could be played. It ends up not being played. Knight takes d4 now, I imagine. And I think what we'll do is we'll go queen b6. And by going queen b6 here, we're defending our b-pawn. We're adding another attacker onto the knight. So they don't really have too much time to kind of deal with that. And if knight c6, we can always just take that and trade. Here we'll just go bishop to b7. We could also take on b2. This is a pawn that actually does look quite enticing to take. And yeah, we're just essentially playing, again, we're just playing a completely different opening, but under very, very good terms. I think I want to take it. I don't see anything too wrong with that. If anything, like d6 we should be able to move out of the way with knight c6, bishop b7. If they play d7, that is. Again, we're not really that afraid of anything they're throwing at us. D7, bishop b7, this pawn actually just will turn out to be a weakness. Is there anything that we should be worried about? I'm not too sure. Because right now, my biggest plan is bishop b7 and then rook a to d8. And this pawn, I can't see its future. It's very unclear to me. And they're kind of just helping me go along with this plan now. With bishop b7. It's on a very beautiful diagonal. We'll go rook to d8. And how should we continue here? I like the move knight e5. I also don't mind the move knight b8. Knight b8 is just kind of challenging them into saying, hey, what are you going to do if I just force the trade and then take on d7 immediately after? This does look like it just wins the pawn on d7. I mean, just because it's advanced and probably weak doesn't mean we shouldn't be scared of it, right? Like, there's always potential for something to go wrong, and this is just a way to minimize that. Now it looks like the pawn should drop off the board, and once it does, we just have this extra b-pawn, and that's something to be proud of. Nothing too shabby. I don't know if that makes sense there, but anyways. So queen e2, I'll just take on d7. Queen e2 feels like a natural move here, just because then they're threatening to play rook d1, and then we have to be a bit more careful on what we're going to do. But if I take it, rook takes, queen takes, or knight takes, I think both are possible, then there's always options. So let's just take that. Doesn't look like they did anything too fancy there. And the thing is, I think we're actually quite happy with the queen trade as well. The reason why I say that is because if a queen trade actually occurs in this position, then when I play moves like b4, it feels like this pawn's just going to be hard to stop. I like this move, knight d5. I also like knight b6, trying to go to c4 and put some pressure on this a3 pawn. I think that's what I might go for here. Because if they try knight or rook to d6, I always have knight c4. And also not just that, but it also helps prevent rook to d5. Okay, knight c4 now. And they're not really able to move over at all. One thing that would be nice to prevent, actually, is, for example, let's just say rook to d7. Maybe just playing this move h6. It feels like a little bit of a waste of time, but it does have good intentions. And here, I would really just like to prevent knight g5 from ever being a problem. So it looks like they're not going to be challenging us in that way. We can just play rook b8. If they ever play knight g5, we just play h6. If they ever play knight e5, they just lose the piece. So again, looks like we're in a good spot. We're almost ready to start pushing the pawn too. So there's two questions we have. Do we take it with, if we play b4 successfully, now it looks like we absolutely will be. Do we take it with, or should we have taken it with either the bishop or the rook, right? Or the pawn or the rook, sorry. But now that's not really as relevant. Looks like we can play this move, bishop to b2. And this actually has a very good purpose. The first one is that I'm just trying to make sure I have extra squares for my king, so I can move it up in the case I need to. And this is another reason why, is because after I play a move like b4, I do have to worry about knight c4, don't I? Let's play a4 instead, because of that. If I have to worry about knight c4, let's just play a4. So now the knight is no longer attacking the pawn. This has a good purpose, because now when I play b4, again, my intentions are revealed. I actually don't want to take with the pawn. I want to take with the rook at some point. Because when I take with the rook, this pawn is actually just harder to stop. And actually right now I don't really have to worry about anything. I can just start pushing it. And there's nothing to be done. So again, especially because there's a knight on the board, that's why it's so much better, is because knights have a very, very difficult time dealing with pawns that are on the side of the board. Now it feels like a2 is good. And if they play knight b3, I want to take on b4. And the idea of taking on b4 here is that their bishop... Well, I'm just threatening to take on b3. I'm not just going for winning their piece. I'm trying to win more than that. Likely, they'll be fine. If they play rook d8 and then rook a8, it looks like that'll happen anyways, where they will technically be fine. But they still have a lot to answer for. This is just essentially just trying to put more pressure on them. But this is still enough to win. And I would say the best way to try to win here is playing something like bishop to d4 and rook b2. And just pretty much continually pressure them into trading their pieces or creating weaknesses. Now rook b2 is possible. And yeah, if they don't trade rooks, we win the f2 pawn. So this is the advantage of having more material rather than, of course, less, is when you have more material, you can kind of bully your opponent into trades that they cannot accept. And here they're just unable to accept that trade without just being completely lost because they have no counterplay. But now when I win this pawn on f2 and move away, I have another threat, which is this g3 pawn, that I will also go after immediately. I like this move, bishop a7 check. And there's a good reason for this. I want to play, if they move up, I want to play rook b3 check and bishop b8 and target this g3 pawn. We'll see what happens. If not, then I just play bishop b8, and again, I'm just trying to target this pawn now. With less material comes more weaknesses. Yeah, rook b3, as I promised. And now I can play this move, bishop b8. So if they play g4, I can just give a check on g3, and they cannot actually defend this h3 pawn. Why not? So I'll try to let you guys calculate that out. That might actually happen in the game. There's also a chance we might see, okay, yeah, we might see rook g4, but they played into this instead. So after rook g3 check, what happens after king to h2? Could you all let me know in the comments below if you haven't seen the move yet? But also, actually, if you're more interested in something else that's maybe a bit more pertinent to you guys, what run would you like to see next? I am really curious, actually. So we can just take the pawn, and we'll just move back. And now what we're going to do is we are just going to probably take the pawn if we can. If we can't, it's not really a big deal, but there is a way we can try to pretty much just win the pawn that they can't really do anything about. And that's this move g5, followed by bishop f4. Once we play this, we can just give this check and take the pawn. I will cover why they couldn't play king h2 in the analysis if you aren't actually sure yourselves. So, stay tuned. All right. So now rook g3 check. Oh, that's a nice trick. Okay, so if we take this pawn, rook f7, because then it would be stalemate, actually. Interesting. That would have been stalemate. So instead, all we need to do is just play something like, this is a nasty move, rook g1 check. And what this does is it allows us to force the exchanges as mentioned before. Rook g1, there's nothing but to take the rook. This is just a tactical flourish to achieve a strategic goal of trading material when trading the material heavily benefits us into just winning the game because there's no counterplay. And here, as we can see, there is absolutely no counterplay. all we need to do is start pushing our pawns. This would have been a draw, actually, if we removed this g-pawn. But luckily, since we have it, we are winning. Let's play h4. Let's play g3. They can never take this pawn if they move up. We still have to be a little bit careful. Like, if they go here and we play h3, it's actually a draw. So we just want to move our bishop away, make sure that they still have legal moves. Always be careful of that. That's always something to worry about. But here we're fine. So check. And check. And mate. Good job. Good job, Brayden. Now let's go over the game and actually talk about that little tactic that I mentioned. So let's move on here. Okay. So yeah, this bishop d3 is actually kind of interesting, surprisingly. Knight c6 was actually played in a master game before, and this bishop d3 move has been played only once in master level play. The thing is, since we're dragon players, and we know we're dragon players, and we're like stuck to sticking to that, that's kind of a problem. Bishop d3 is not really a great way to develop because it prevents the development of this bishop on c1. However, there is a good reason why this could be effective, and that's exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to play against people like me, who's going to be playing the dragon anytime they can. So one of the biggest problems I've mentioned against playing the dragon, I'm not even talking about the Yugoslav attack or anything like that, where, you know, it's very, very difficult to play as black from a theoretical perspective. Though even still black, you know, does have their chances. When you play against these c3 Sicilians, so like for example c3, if you play g6, whenever you're playing into these with a bishop on g7, you're going to be running into a lot of difficulties. And that's because your bishop doesn't really have much scope, and you have a space disadvantage or deficit, however you want to put it. So we can play moves like d6, knight f6, but then where does this knight go, right? It probably has to go to d7, because if it goes to c6, d5 happens, right? So let's just play that out a little bit. Knight f6, knight f3, d6, h3. Knight c6 isn't really so great because we're always scared of some sort of like d5, bishop b5 action, as well as like, yeah, the knight's just always kind of vulnerable here. But if we put it on d7, let's just say castles, bishop e2, and then like knight d7, it's also not really that happy here either, because this bishop's kind of stuck. And if you bring it to the long diagonal, well, it's not really clear if you'll be able to make any pressure out of that either. For example, d5 could occur. e5 is also kind of out of the question. For example, castles e5, because you can actually push in this position, and you're reaching some sort of King's Indian attack, or King's Indian defense, my apologies, where the c-pawns have already been traded, and this is actually heavily in white's favor, so this is just a no-go as well. Yeah, there's just not really much of an attack on the king side, which is why you would go for something like that, is you have that type of counterplay. So yeah, again, these positions are the ones you should be worrying about as a dragon player. I do recommend, if you have to study like one thing, generally those open positions, everyone's going to mess up and it's always going to be crazy, but these ones, it's white can mess them up, but like there's a lot of natural moves that white can play in the meantime, and if they just wait around, it's hard for black to do the same thing and just make useful improving moves. So really, you got to know your stuff here if you want to play these positions well. So that's why they played bishop d3. Kind of a long explanation there. So when we see bishop d3, we should absolutely not be playing the dragon, but because we are, we're going to. So I think knight c6 or d5 moves like this should be totally fine. For example, one of the best ways to play against c3 is to play d5. So when you see bishop d3, d5 is also one of the first things I think of as well. Just trying to punish the fact that this bishop just does not belong on d3. We're already attacking g2, so they don't have useful tempos like this. But then again, they do have bishop to e4. This could be actually quite interesting. Regardless, I still kind of think what I said is true, and that bishop d3 does have its faults. So g6, c3. And now we could be in trouble after d4 and h3. I think that was correct by them. So I was thinking here d4. I was going to take it and play bishop to g2 and just see what they do. I think you could probably get away with this. Something like this. From my experience, I've played these from the white side a little bit, and I actually quite enjoy this, despite the fact that we played g takes f3. Of course, if you can just prevent it with h3 and make sure that black has as many pieces as possible in a cramped position, that's very good as well. But, okay. Going back. So, yeah, e5. I thought this was actually a good way to do this. And if we check master gameplay, 3 games have been played in this exact position. 2 of them featured e5 and 1 of them knight f6. So we were actually kind of on the right track if we just look at master games alone. That this does appear to be the correct way to go about it. And yeah, I don't really unfortunately see another choice, because if we play moves like knight to f6 and then start allowing moves like d4, yeah, we probably should just play e5 anyways here, but then we don't have the flexibility of knight e7. We can take on d4, but I'll actually just show you guys the results here. On like the master game side, white is overwhelmingly better in these positions. This is, again, the big thing I'm scared of with these Dragon Sicilians. By the way, I'm sorry, this is a Dragon speedrun, and I know it seems like, you know, I should be talking up the dragon and everything, and I will be when it makes sense to. I think it's a good practical opening for club level players, and I've been killed by it many times. But when you talk about the objectivity of it, the practical sense at the top level, the computer sense, the opening starts to struggle quite a bit, and we can see that just from these games alone. And if you enter specifically this position, I think this is where you're going to have the most trouble realistically, not the main lines where there's like a theoretical advantage for white. This one where there's still something just kind of wrong with black's position. It's hard to solve. So yeah, okay. So e5, knight g e7. Again, now we're just following down kind of regular Ruy Lopez theory. This move a3 I think is fine. It's a little slow to me. I think they should just be playing d3 or d4 here, and then just playing this again like a normal Ruy Lopez. Bring the knight to g3 and so on. And one thing that you could actually argue is that by playing bishop d3 and c2, they save time because we didn't kick them away with a6, b5. But we also save time because we didn't play bishop e7, we played bishop g6, and we are also bringing our knight to e7 instead of f6, where, you know, the knight on e7 I think actually stands just slightly better, because if we need to put a knight on f6, we can actually bring this knight there by playing all the way back. So for example, let's just say after e5 castles, knight e7, they played d4, we castle, d5, knight d7, and then they play knight d2, knight d7, rook e1. We could always play knight to f6 here. Though I think here I would probably go for some sort of King's Indian setup with h6. This move, the whole point of it is I'm trying to play for f5, but not allow knight g5. So there's like a lot of stuff going on. I can explain like all of the details. I'm just trying to like cover a lot of bases, you know, like if you don't understand all of these things that I'm talking about, that's totally okay. For the people that do, excellent. Because like I'm trying to make sure that there's like a lesson for everybody, and it's not just, you know, just for beginners or just for like intermediates. I'm trying to, you know, show a bunch of different things and relate things to different structures and openings, because when you do that, it's actually a very good thing for your chess. You realize, oh, these openings aren't just because I played the first 3 moves and I'm in the opening. It's, oh, this pawn structure relates to different openings like the King's Indian or the Ruy Lopez, and because of that, I need to adjust my plans accordingly. This is no longer really a dragon. This is e5 or a King's Indian. So rook e1, and yeah, if I play f5, there's this annoying move knight g5. To play to knight to e6. So for example, knight to f6, and if knight e6, I mean, this probably is actually quite good for black, but this is always something to think about in these openings, is that whenever you enter into King's Indian structures, this is an idea, just to get rid of your light square bishop, which could actually be a serious attacking piece. So let's just say they play it in a different way here, where they move their piece back, right? And now we play f4. Let's just say this knight to f1, knight to f6, b4, trying to create some play on the queen side. g5, you can see what's going on. This bishop's all of a sudden actually a really good piece. It's helping create an attack on the king side. So just a rough idea, but that's why something like h6 could be useful, and that's why the knight on e7 is not so bad. So that's a very long-winded explanation, but that's why I like the knight on e7. So a3, castles, d3, b5. Of course, if we can play a move like b5, we should. b4 is a normal break that we'd like to achieve, create some play on the queen side if we can. a5 instead of a6, kind of a nice move to be able to make. And this just means that, you know, if we see something like a4, we can meet it with b4. And we're actually quite happy about that, I think. I could be wrong, though, but it does feel like the correct way to play. Anyway, so yeah, c takes, and d5. I was actually really happy to get this in, but let's just quickly evaluate the move and just see if we're right. d5 is like the break. That's awesome to see. So I'm glad that my intuition was correct, and that this is the way we should be playing this opening. It's actually like the only move that equalizes, which is cool. So know your breaks, people. This is a very common break, even if it's like a little messy because, you know, all of the pawns are in the center. Just know your stuff. Like, there's lots of different ways we can relate these things to other things and blah, 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 blah. But the way that I knew this is actually because I've played a lot of the Ruy Lopez, and I've looked at a lot of games in the Ruy Lopez. And this d5 break is how black can equalize. And actually now, like, sometimes the engine's like kind of preferring black a little bit, which is kind of nice. And I think it's because of this really good bishop, the dragon bishop, but also not dragon. It's very confusing. So d5 takes. Looks like I should have taken on d5 to get a tempo on this bishop. My bad. That does make sense to go for this. I was just thinking, what about bishop to e4? But looks like we can actually just take on e3 here and play bishop to... I like bishop b7 more than d7. But I'm not sure if it matters. So bishop d7, what if they take on e5 here? Knight takes e5, cool. And knight c4, wow. So you're just creating a lot of threats. And the thing is, if they move their bishop away, you can take on e3, regain the exchange, and then some. That's really cool, but I did not see that. I'm going to be 100% honest with you guys. I did not even think of that. Because this is what I was worried about, is this bishop e4 move. I saw knight e3, but nothing past this. Like, this is like where I ended my analysis in my head. So, yeah, just like a bunch of different lessons for you guys. Remember, don't be afraid to transpose into different openings. This is why some openings could be good for you to know. Again, if you're a dragon player, learn King's Indian structures. Those are very good for you. And learn these e5 structures, and just in case, right? Like, if you have that flexibility, why not use it? So, queen b6, d6 I thought was going to be a good idea, just because they might be able to take this pawn after. But they ended up going knight f3, and then, yeah, I just take the pawn. So I was thinking about bishop b7 as well. Looks like this is a good move, d6, knight c6. Actually, rook fd8 is quite strong, because it actually... The thing is, you don't want to play this rook to d8, because then when they take, they can take on f8 with check, intermezzo, and then take back. But, okay, I didn't play that. Either way, feels like we got a pretty decent position here. Knight d5. Because of bishop e6. That's some sauce right there. Wow. Okay. That's why I'm not a grandmaster, or even a title player for that matter. So bishop b7, bishop b4, and yeah, when we play this move rook a8, interestingly enough, we're losing our advantage. Huh. Was it important to play something else here? Once knight d8. I thought rook a8 had to be fine, but queen d6 is just a huge problem. And I think it's because there's just a bunch of pins going on, and there's not really a good way to deal with it. Like, the only way to deal with this is playing queen a6 with the idea of knight b8. And that's not a comfortable move. So if you play knight b8 here, now you can't even play it, right? Because Everything's just kind of stuck. Wow. Okay. Well, you know, if I miss that, then that's okay with me because that's just really, really difficult. So bishop b7, queen b7, and now it is simple. Again, it is simple, kind of. We're going to be picking up this pawn, and then when we do, we're just going to have an outside pass pawn, and that's going to be decisive, especially because this bishop just being in the game, the fact that it can control some of the promotion squares or close to it. B2 is the one that's close to it. A1 is a promotion square. You get the point. So this, yeah, it's a big deal. They should never trade queens here. Or if they do, like, I think queen d2 makes sense. But queen takes d7, I think, is just admitting that the game's just over. And the reason why is because, well, I have these ideas of, again, b4, and then actually potentially a4, a3, maybe after the knight. It all depends, right? Or maybe still just taking like this, bringing the pawn to b2, and then the rook over to like a1 or something, and then they're just paralyzed and can't do anything, right? Here, knight b6, knight c4, everything with tempo, rook b8. And yeah, I was extremely happy to get this move in. I thought, I was thinking of b4 here as well, but they can always take on a5, and that's kind of tricky, right? Because if they take on a5, this still probably good after b3, but as you saw in the game, after bishop b2, I just felt like they were kind of more and more stuck. So bishop to b2, rook d3, a4. And the idea of a4 again is, so if we played b4, I was scared of like knight c4 actually being a problem. Now I see b takes a3, I'm kind of less sure. Because after knight takes, we can play this move a4, which is nice, and then rook b3 is coming. But I didn't see that. All I saw was like, oh, I take here, takes, rook takes, and yeah, this does look really good, like rook a8 or something. A4 maybe, and then just bring the king up, and yeah, there's winning chances, but this is far from over, right? That is still something that could be defended. But with a4, the idea is, yeah, we're just preventing this knight c4 move, and it's hard to find a move for them, because now if I end up getting to play b4 after knight c4, then I was looking at taking on a3, and then actually b3 would work. So for example, if they play like king f1, b4, knight c4, takes, knight takes, then there's actually rook b3, I think. And this has to be just game over, unless I'm a silly willy, but that looked really good. So knight f3, b4, and again, we don't need to take it like with the pawn. The whole idea was to push because you know, the bishop controls the queening square. So yeah, just a little lesson of like, don't just stick to like one idea of taking towards the center. It's an ending. Usually just because the pawn's in the center, it actually doesn't really mean as much anymore. But let's go on to the 1 point, because I quizzed you guys a while back, and you guys are probably wondering, if you haven't seen it yet, what happens after king h2. You probably already know, but it's good to check. Well, they're actually in a discovery here. And when we play rook takes g4, actually I was looking at rook a3 check in the game, which also works, but rook takes g4 equally is good, because it checks the king has to move, and then we can take the rook. And yeah, that is why they can't defend the pawn on h3 without just losing the game much faster. One last point that I would like to mention here, very good trick by my opponent. Rook takes g4 would be a blunder because of rook takes f7, and I would cry myself to sleep for a couple hours. Nothing to do here, just a complete draw. King h6, okay, rook f6 check, king g7, rook g6 does not work. Interestingly enough, you have to play rook f7 because you have to keep the king in this little box here. There's actually a good reason for that, because if you play this, eventually it looks like you can get out of it. King d7, rook d6, king c8, rook c6, and then bishop c7. There we go. And now, unfortunately, there's no more checks, because if you check, there's actually h2 now. Okay, interesting stuff, but yeah, I'm sure my opponent would have seen that, just kept checking like this, and wouldn't have given me anything. And of course, one thing to mention is that here, after this, if I go up, then they just go rook h6 check. Now I have to take it. It's immediately a draw. Crazy stuff. But of course, rook g1 check just finishes the game. They try a tactic against me. I try tactic against them. They're actually forced to take bishop e3 check, and the game is just over. So, yeah, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this game. There's a lot of interesting stuff that happened in regards to just understanding openings, a bunch of different traps in the endgame, a bunch of different, I don't know, stuff and things to look at. That's about it. So, I'll talk to you guys later. Yeah. Bye-bye.